Having talked about the tool and the migration process, let's start the actual migration by exporting the configuration from ACS. So it's a simple, straightforward process. You have to click on the Export from ACS button, type in the host name, username, and password. It is important that this host name corresponds to the common name in the ACS self-signed certificate added. The migration tool, when it talks to ACS and ISE, it uses REST APIs. So if you have a firewall between the migration tool and ACS or ISE server, please open up port 443. The migration tool verifies if the host name you type in and the common name of the certificate matches with each other. If it doesn't match, then it will throw an error. You have to make sure that the subject common name corresponds to the host name of the DNS. And also it verifies the IP. So if the DNS or the host file on your Windows machine has an IP address which is different than the IP address of your ACS and ISE server that you are connecting to from the migration tool, it will not work. It will throw an error again. So please make sure these things are configured correctly. Now, type in the host name, the username, and the password for the administrator of ACS, and click Connect. Now you can see that the export process has started, and the current running process shows exporting. So when you click on the export report, you can see that the report has gotten generated. The same with the policy gap analysis report. When you click the policy gap analysis report, you see that the policy gap analysis report got generated as well. Now, as and when the export of a certain object completes, you can see the count and the success increased. If you see a warnings, you can click on the warnings count link as shown in this window. The migration tool will open up another window that displays all the warnings as part of the export process. When you double click on the predefined reference data object container, you'll see that all the different objects under this container got migrated successfully. Same with dictionaries. However, we see that there are 281 warnings in the dictionary. We will come back to it in a little bit. Users and identity stores has 4 warnings, and there are 7 warnings in devices. So let's take a look at some of these warnings. First, let's look at the devices. When you click on the warnings, and it opens up a window that displays the warnings under devices, right? When you look at this, all these warnings seem to be benign because these objects are already available in ISE and it will not be exported. There are certain default objects that becomes available out of box when you do a fresh install of ISE. These are some of the objects that will not get exported or migrated from ACS to ISE. Let's take a look at the policy elements. We can see that all the policy elements got migrated. However, you see 11 warnings there. And it also says export finished. Now, when you look at the warnings and the policy elements, you can see that most of the warnings are benign except for one warning. It says that deny space access, which is an authorization profile, cannot be exported because of a special character. Now, ISE does not support all the special characters that is supported in ACS. ISE has stringent naming constraints. So ISE basically supports alphanumeric, underscore, hyphen. In most of the objects. However, there are certain objects like users where ISE supports more characters, right? So here it says that it has special characters and hence it will not be exported. So this is issue number one. We'll have to go back and fix the issue. Again, it says valid name contains alphanumeric space. In fact, you see a space between deny space access, and this is an error in the migration tool reporting. I've in fact talked to development engineering about this issue and asked them to fix it. Now let's look at the users and identity store, right? When you click on the warnings, it says that the ISE does not support additional attribute retrieval search list. We will take a look at this in a little bit. It also says the Active Directory attribute cannot be migrated because it is not supported in ISE. So there are certain attributes such as LDAP and Active Directory attributes which can directly be configured as an inline condition in ISE. And in fact, these are available as an example in some of the hidden slides in this click-through demonstration. You can take a look at it at your leisure. Now we see that there is one error which is interesting, right? Let's click on this error. We find that the date and time condition cannot be migrated because the timetable selection is not supported in ISE. And this is likely to be supported in the later releases of ISE. So please stay tuned. We will provide more information as and when we get information from PMs. We also saw that there are lots of warnings in dictionaries. Now let's open up and take a look at it. When we open up the warnings in the dictionaries, we see that there are a lot of objects, and it says that it will not be exported because it's already predefined. ISE has a predefined set of attributes based on the third-party NATs, based on the IETF attributes, and based on Cisco attributes, based on several different things that are built into ISE. Every release of ISE, you will find more attributes added. So these will not be migrated over because it's already predefined, and that's what this says, and this is very benign. Let's slide up and see if there are any other warnings that we should be looking into. Now when you look at the identity attributes, you can see that a particular identity attribute called real space name will not be migrated because the name contains special characters. Now it also says the valid name can contain alphanumeric, hyphen, underscore, and dot. Now I spoke about the standalone tool, right? This standalone tool will have useful and flexible enhancements. The migration tool will be able to convert these special characters that are not supported in ISE to characters that are supported, such as underscore or hyphen. Usually it uses underscore. So if there are any attributes from ACS that has unsupported characters, the migration tool converts these characters to supported ISE characters, and also it will report that these characters have changed in the export as well as the import report, and the migration will be seamless. This does not happen to critical objects such as users and passwords, where names are pretty important and names and characters are pretty important. It happens only to non-critical objects such as authorization profiles, command sets, shell profiles, and all of that. Now this is issue number 2. We need to fix this name of the identity attribute in ACS and export again. You also have the option of not fixing it. If you want to do that, you need to create a new identity attribute in ISE if you do not fix this particular attribute in ACS. Now, having discussed about the warnings, let's quickly take a look at the export report and see if these warnings and errors are in fact displayed in the export report. So when you click on the export report button on the top, it opens up a window that displays the export report and objects that are being exported successfully, errors, as well as warnings. The export report has two buttons at the bottom, previous and next page, to parse through these pages. As you browse through the export report from top to bottom, you can see that the vendor attributes are exported, the network device groups being exported, network devices being exported, and it also displays the error that we have already seen, that the date and time condition may not be exported because it is not supported. And finally, you'll see an execution time summary, which displays the start, end date and time, as well as the duration. The execution summary says that it took around 24 minutes for it to export. Now, based on the configuration complexity, this may vary, right? So we have seen in a typical customer setup where there are around 16,000 network devices, it took around 3 to 3.5 hours for the predefined attributes and the dictionaries to get migrated. And then it took an hour to an hour and a half for the network devices to get migrated. This customer has an external AD store, so they used external users. They had several hundred network device groups as well. So it took around 5 hours for the entire export to complete. However, for the import, it took an hour and a half. So based on the complexity of the configuration, the time taken for the migration process would differ, right? In a large-scale customer environment, where you have 300,000 users, 100,000 network devices, few hundred authorization profiles, policies, command sets, and so on, it takes around 2 days for the entire migration to complete. Let's take a look at the policy groups under access policies. In ACS, you have service selection policies, which is called as policy sets in ISE. Now we'll have to make sure all these service selection policies are exported. And I'm going to click cancel for the sake of this demonstration and continue with our import. The LDAP attribute configuration was only meant for migrating any LDAP attributes over from ACS to ISE. Ouch! You see a warning right away. Now, as part of the pre-migration requirement, you need to enable the migration interface in both ACS and ISE. I have already enabled the interface in ACS, and that's why we were able to export easily. Now, I have not done that for ISE, just to show that a warning might pop up if you do not have the migration interface turned on in both ACS and ISE. So I click on cancel, open up a secure shell connection manager such as PuTTY, and connect to ISE using SSH and log into ISE using admin credentials. Now we are at the CLI prompt. I type in application configure ISE and choose option 11 to enable or disable ACS migration. Confirm yes. Type 14 to exit out of the menu. ISE is now ready to accept connection from the migration tool. I click on the import to ISE button again, bypass the LDAP attribute dialog boxes, canceling the LDAP attribute configuration. Ouch! There is another warning. Now, when we discussed about the migration tool initially, I said that you need to download the right version of the migration tool, right? I was using a version of the migration tool that is supported and downloaded from ISE 2.0, and that's not supported in ISE 2.1. So when I try to connect to ISE 2.1, it says that it's not supported. You need to download the correct version of the migration tool based on the ISE version you're using. If you're using ISE 2.1, this migration tool is available from the ISE user interface as well as from the Cisco Software Download Center under ISE 2.1. Now I'm going to go ahead and download the migration tool in the background and use the migration tool. This time I've installed the right version of the migration tool. If you do not do that, you'll have to do the export all over again, right? Imagine, like in my test bed, it took me 24 minutes to export. However, based on your configuration, if it takes hours to export, you'll have to do it all over again. So this is a very important piece of information that you have to remember to use the right version of the migration tool. Now I click export and I complete the migration. Now it is interesting that we see a lot of dictionary objects appearing as warnings. Same with users and identity stores, devices, policy elements. And there is a new error as well in users and identity stores. Now when I looked at these dictionary warnings, all these seemed benign because these were predefined objects that comes with ISE out of the box. Every version of ISE, we add more and more dictionaries and predefined attributes, and that's why you see a much higher number of attributes under warnings. Finally, you will see the execution time summary at the end of the report. Now let's take a look at the policy gap analysis report. Now it says that all the policies are found compatible with the ISE, so you don't have to go back to ACS and fix any policies. Let's go back to ACS and fix issue number 1. Now you log into the ACS user interface using the admin credentials. Go to policy elements authorization profile. We found that there is a profile called deny space access, and I change the name to deny underscore access, as we know that underscore is something supported in ISE. Let's fix issue number 2 by renaming the user attribute. Now we go to identity attributes, which is under system administration, configuration, dictionaries, identity, and internal users. And we see that there is an attribute called real name, real space name. We fix it by introducing an underscore. Now let's quickly talk about the additional attribute retrieval search. And we saw that there was an error in the users and identity store section. There was a warning, and it said that it is not supported in ISE. Now when you go to the identity store sequence section in ACS and open up the entry, and you see that there are 2 sections, the authentication and the additional attribute retrieval search list. From what is displayed in this window, the top half will be migrated over and the bottom half will not be. This is because ISE already supports Active Directory and LDAP attributes. The only thing is you need to configure it in a different way, and you can add these attributes as inline condition in ISE. So I have some hidden slides in this click-through demonstration. You can take a look at it at your leisure. Now once you complete fixing these issues, you'll have to rerun the export. You have to click on export from ACS and type in the host name, username, password, click connect. Now once the export is complete, we'll have to verify from the warnings if the authorization profile and the identity attribute that we fixed does not appear again in the warnings. or errors. So once the export is complete, you will see the process changing from exporting to export finished. The next step is to import these configurations over to ISE. When you click on the Import to ISE button in the migration tool, it starts importing to ISE. Now a dialog box opens up and it'll ask you to add attributes for LDAP before importing. Now when I click on the errors in users and identity stores, it says that a particular user failed to export because it does not match the password complexity. You might encounter this error during migration. Let's see how to fix this problem. There is a difference between ACS and ISE complexity requirements for passwords. In ACS, by default, the minimum length is 8 characters. In ISE, the minimum length is 4 characters, right? In my test setup, and I had 5 characters, now I'm going to reduce this to 4 so that it will fix this particular error. You might also encounter this error if you are using ACS 5.7. ACS 5.7 started supporting password hashing. So if you have ACS 5.7 in your environment, please disable password hashing to avoid the same error. Let's go back to the migration tool and look at the second error under policy elements. And we have seen this error already. Now that we have fixed the password complexity of the user, let us re-export again. As a workaround, you can choose to create the same user in ISE and not re-export again. So I'm going to go back to the tool and click on Export from ACS to export again. Now that the export is complete, you can see that there is only one error that we already looked into. Before importing, let's verify a few things, such as if the licenses are installed and available in ISE, if the device administration service is turned on, etc. So go to Administration Systems Licensing in ISE UI and make sure you have the device administration license. Enable the device admin service by going to Administration, System, Deployment, and you have to edit the node. Under Personas, go to Policy Services, and you'll have to turn on the device admin service. Finally, you'll have to enable the policy sets, which is under Administration, Systems, Settings menu. So the fourth step is to make sure the names in ACS and ISE are not similar for policy elements and policies. So ISE uses a very flat namespace. The names in policy elements and policies cannot overlap. Also, the migration tool will not migrate objects if there are policies and policy elements in ISE with the same names as in ACS. And let's go to the policy sets and make sure these names are unique. Right? You see that the device administration policy set has got a default of TACACS_default. Let's also open up the Work Center under Network Access and make sure we look at the names of the policy sets as well as the policies under. Now, having observed that, let's go back to ACS and make sure there are no name overlaps. Now I go back to the ACS tab in my browser. Go to access policies and I see that there is a TACACS default access policy already configured. Now I need to change the name. So to rename the service selection policy, I have to go to access services and let me also rename the access services to match the name of the service selection policy. So I go to access policy, access services, and see that like it's TACACS_default. I change the name to TACACS_default_old. This is an optional step. However, I just want to do it to match the service selection policy with the access services to make it more intuitive. Once you renamed the access services, you have to go back and rename the service selection policy, which is an important step to fix the name overlaps. To rename the service selection policy, you have to click on the service selection rules under access services, go to the TACACS default policy, change the name there. Now I use the name TACACS default_old1 for the service selection policy, just to differentiate the name of the service selection policy from the access service. Now before importing, let's also make sure we look at some of the configuration areas to see what are the defaults, so that once we migrate we will know what to expect and if those entries from ACS are in fact migrated over to ISE. We can see that in users and identity groups there are around 7 default entries that comes out of box after installation. We also see that there are no active directory configuration. So these are some of the sample items I want to show. When you do a migration in your staging environment, you can go and look at all the entries to get a better understanding. Now let's get ready to import. To start the import, click Import to ISE button on the migration tool. Click Cancel to continue as before. When a dialog box pops up, type in the host name, the admin username and the password of ISE. Now you see that the import is much faster. You also see that there are a lot of predefined attributes that says that it will not be imported. This is because ISE already has a set of predefined attributes and the migration tool knows about this and will not re-import these attributes. Once the import is complete, you can look at the errors and warnings, and let's look at the error that appeared in the migration tool window. We click on the error to open the report. It shows that there is one particular user that's not imported, and this is because this user already exists. ISE has a flat namespace. There is already an admin user that exists. This is a super admin user, right? So you have an option to go and change the ACS so that this particular admin user can be migrated, or you can create a new username, or you can use the same admin user as your new admin user. So you have a couple of choices here. Now for the sake of demonstration, I'm not going to go and fix it. I'm going to just continue. And this is an acceptable workaround for me. So remember that in your setup, right, you have to make trade-offs between fixes and acceptable workaround based on the time it takes for exporting and importing as well. If it takes a long time to export and import, then it doesn't make sense to fix 1 or 2 entries. You might as well create these things in ISE.